Hi everybody, my name is Christine Katansky. I'm from New Jersey, and today, Thursday, July 11th, 2019, is World Benzodiazepine Awareness Day. Today I just wanted to do a short video on and share a little bit about my story and what happened to me when I was prescribed these drugs. I also want to bring awareness to people that may not be aware of the dangers of these prescribed medications and what can happen. Never in a million years did I even know this existed, and the repercussions of taking this medication, and, you know, the pain that I, along with thousands and thousands of other people, are currently going through right now. I've actually been off this medication since July 19th of 2018. So it's almost a year that I've actually been off these medications. And I'm still, although I've come a long way, and there are improvements, I still suffer from residual side effects and symptoms from that class of medication. And I don't want to drag it on too long, but I was put on these medications in November of 2015. I always suffered, I wouldn't even use the word suffer, suffered. I always had a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of mild depression, but I was functional. I never took any medications for it. I never took antidepressants or anything. I just kind of dealt with it, and it would come and go, but it was manageable. So in November of 2015, my father passed away. I'm gonna try not to cry. But my father passed away suddenly. It's really close to my dad. And it was kind of unexpected, and he collapsed in front of me and my son, and, died. And, I had to watch him being resuscitated and all. And it caused immediate, anxiety and panic attacks. I started getting the anxiety and panic attacks the next day, just from the trauma of witnessing that. And within 3 days of his death, my family had called an ambulance to take me to the hospital. I thought I was having a heart attack. It ended up being an anxiety attack from the PTSD and the stress of what had happened. And the emergency room had given me a few doses of Xanax, which I took, and they told me to follow up with my general practitioner as soon as possible. And I did just that. I took the Xanax, and like I said, they'd only given me a couple pills, and then I followed up with my general practitioner who, after I told him what had happened and he knew I was in the emergency room, he gave me a prescription and said that I needed to be on that. He prescribed it, I believe, 3 times a day, 0.50, and I got the prescription filled and I started taking it. During the course of the next few months, I didn't take it as prescribed. I actually took it less. So I kind of just took it as needed. When I was feeling, a lot of anxiety or stress or any of those symptoms, a panic attack coming on, I would take the medication. In hindsight, there were subtle things that were going on after I started taking the medication. I started getting nerve pain in my arm, and I started getting worse anxiety. I started getting chest pains and palpitations, and I, followed up with a neurologist. They did nerve tests. I went to a cardiologist, and they did all kinds of tests, and everything came back, pretty much normal. So I just attributed it to just from, the death of my father and what I was going through, the grief and all. As the months continued on, I started to get worse anxiety. I was getting these horrible anxiety attacks that would hit me at any given moment for no reason. I wasn't upset. I could be out to dinner and I was getting these horrible feelings of not being able to breathe, and, somebody sitting on my chest. The pain, I started getting more nerve pain throughout my body. All kinds, pain near my heart, chest pains. continued to get worse. They even put me in the hospital overnight to just make sure, to rule out things with my heart, and everything pretty much came back normal. And again, I started to take the medication as prescribed. As these symptoms continued to get worse, I was starting to take the medication more, but as prescribed. But I was taking it, maybe like every other day instead of like once or twice a week. In the summer of June of 2017, I, out of the blue, started getting horrific pain throughout my body. My back, I had horrible, horrible nerve pain. My legs, I felt like I couldn't walk. I felt like I had concrete blocks on my legs and they felt very heavy. I began experiencing horrific anxiety attacks and panic attacks that would last for hours. I started not being able to think. I felt like I had brain fog. I started not being able to eat. I was losing weight for no reason. I thought I just couldn't figure out why I was losing weight. I started to not be able to function. I couldn't remember things. I started to be afraid to leave the house. I was going to my job and I was having to leave, which I've been at my job for almost 19 years and I never would have to leave work sick. Maybe one time I left work while I was there sick in all those years. And I was starting to have to leave work with anxiety attacks and feeling dizzy. The pain was excruciating. And I followed up with my doctor, told him about the pain. He sent me to physical therapy. They also sent me for x-rays. They sent me to an orthopedic doctor who did MRIs of every part of my back. I was sent to a rheumatologist. I was sent to a infectious disease doctor. I was sent back to the cardiologist. I was sent to a neurologist. I went to another neurologist in Philadelphia in another state. Countless emergency room visits. I thought I was dying. I literally thought I was dying of something. That's how bad it was. And it was just getting worse and worse. And I was still taking the medication. And not once did any of these doctors ever suspect it was the medication. My son even drove me to an emergency room in Philadelphia one day just to see if they could find answers to what was going on, because I was just deteriorating worse and worse. And I was convinced that I was dying. That's how I felt. I became bedridden. I had to take a leave from work. It was horrific. I had no idea what was going on. I was just out of my mind with worry and not knowing what was wrong. In the course of going to these emergency room visits, like I said, I was originally prescribed Xanax, and when I went to the emergency room the one time, they took me off the Xanax and actually gave me Klonopin and told me to follow up with my doctor. I followed up with the doctor and they switched me to Klonopin. Another emergency room visit resulted in them switching me to Ativan. They had me on IV Ativan, and I had to follow up with my doctor again, and it was changed to 4 milligrams of Ativan, which is a very high dose of these medications. Once I was put on that, I actually became suicidal. I started experiencing suicidal ideations and thoughts, and never in my life have I ever been suicidal. My sister, who is a nurse, said, I think it's the Xanax. And then I was told that you cannot abruptly just stop taking these drugs, that you could have a heart attack or a seizure, and you could potentially die, which scared the living crap out of me. At this point, this was about 4 months into when the horrific symptoms had hit, and I was completely out of my mind. I was suicidal. I was on the verge of suicide, of something bad was going to happen. So I made the decision to put myself into a detox center. I had good insurance with work. I thought that they would know what they were doing, and I would be safely taken off safely taken off these drugs. Little did I know that that was the biggest mistake of my life. And one thing I want to put out there is I don't even blame the detox centers necessarily. I'm an advocate, for recovery and people going into recovery centers to get taken off, heroin and different drugs. My problem is that the recovery centers are not up on how to take people off benzodiazepines. When I was put myself in there, I was in there for approximately 17 days. I was actually taken off the medication in 6 days, pretty much cold turkeyed off that medication. And it was absolutely horrific. And they used Librium, which is another benzodiazepine. And I was basically taken off the benzodiazepines, similar to the way people came off heroin, within only like a week. And I was deathly sick at the recovery center. It was horrific. I had tremors and twitches and pain and panic attacks and suicidal thoughts. And I thought I was gonna die. I literally thought I was gonna die while I was in there. And like I said, if there's one goal that I have, I would love to see that detox centers are, that learn about this and learn that people coming off these medications have to be slowly weaned. But also these recovery centers, it all has to do with insurance too. So the health insurance companies have to be versed in this also, and the doctors and the psychiatrists. And while I was in the detox center, I was put on about 6 or 7 other medications, to combat the effects of coming off this medication. And the medications that I was put on in the detox center were probably just as bad as the benzodiazepine that I was coming off. Some of the other drugs were, gabapentin and Visterol and Clonidine and Pristiq. I was put on an antidepressant in there, and just a concoction of all kinds of things while I was in there. I also had to be taken by ambulance from the detox center to a hospital because my blood pressure was skyrocketing and I felt like I was gonna have a heart attack. I was given a heart catheterization while I was in acute withdrawal, given steroids while in acute withdrawal. My body was shaking. The tremors and twitches were unbelievable. And I thought I was gonna die just from being given the steroids on top of being in acute withdrawal. I was then taken back to the detox center. And then I was released to go home within like a week of going back to the detox center. And I was deathly sick in the detox center. I was so sick. I went home and I just continued to get worse and worse and worse. And I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was falling through the floor. I was having panic attacks. I had tremors in my brain, air hunger, which means you can't breathe. You feel like you can't breathe. I was hallucinating. I had head pressure that felt like it was pulling me to the ground. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, just trying to drag it around. I had chemical fear, where your mind just loops and loops and loops, and you feel like literally that somebody is putting a gun to your head, and that you're gonna die at any minute. The list could go on and on and on with the horrific symptoms that I was having. I was scared to death all the time, like I said, and it was all chemically induced. The receptors in my brain were actually, and are still actually injured, my GABA receptors, and my nervous system is also injured. Just to put out there, I actually went to a neurologist who explained some of this to me and actually told me that, of course the brain is very slow to heal, but there's something called the basal ganglia, which is deep inside your brain, and the reason for these looping thoughts and fear, chemical fear and suicidal ideations is because that part of the brain being injured from these medications like a normal person, like a door that opens and closes. When you have bad thoughts, your brain can shut the door and shut those bad thoughts down. Where in somebody like me and other people that are injured from these medications, the door stays open all the time. So you can't shut any of that down, and it just loops and loops and loops. Kind of like horses in a corral that will keep running out of the corral, just keep running out. So this is something that is better, but I still do have those looping thoughts, and the chemical fear isn't as bad, but it's gotten better. So one of the things that I hope will change are the way detox centers, their protocol in handling people coming off these medications. The other thing that just as bad as coming off these medications and the symptoms that everyone is feeling coming off these medications, I'm sorry, I'm rambling and I'm losing my train of thought, but the other thing that's just as important is that the medical community needs to be informed of what can happen with these drugs. Not everybody will experience this coming off these drugs, but they say between 30 and 35% of people experience this. I feel like it's much higher than 30 to 35%. This is like a silent epidemic, and this isn't reported, and it's basically invisible. People aren't aware of this. Doctors aren't aware of this. Psychiatrists aren't aware of this, and they tell you that it's just your anxiety, that the medication wouldn't do this, or coming off the medication after a few weeks you wouldn't still be experiencing all these symptoms. What they do is they just tell you it's your anxiety, and then they try to give you more drugs on top of the benzodiazepines. Then they'll give you drugs for sleeping, which they are horrific to come off of too, and they all have side effects. So it's like a vicious cycle. There's also doctors cutting people off these medications abruptly, which results in seizures and people going off the deep end. I've met so many people in these support groups that actually helped save my life while I was going through this, that didn't make it, that ended up ending their lives from the horrific suffering from these drugs. So that's something else that it needs to be. This needs to be reported, and doctors need to be, taught this and learn about, what the potential consequences are of giving people these drugs. There's people that have gone on these drugs and come off and had no problem, and then went on them a second time and then had horrific withdrawals from trying to come off the drugs. Some people can come off them and have minimal side effects and just a couple months of withdrawals, and then there's other people that it takes years. This is something that's been going on with me for 2 years, and even since I've come off the medication, I still have terrible symptoms. I kind of fake it till I make it, because most people don't believe this, or they think it's just in your head, or it's your anxiety, and they don't want to hear about it. It's like I have to be silent about this in order to make other people comfortable, and I'm tired of doing that. This needs to be brought forth. There are so many people around the world suffering from this, and doctors need to tell their patients this. There needs to be informed consent. People have to really know what this can cause. Yes, there are side effects when you go pick up your prescription on the bag, when you go to pick it up, but it doesn't even touch what could actually happen. I never thought something like this could happen, and my brain still feels injured. I still have tremors in my head. I still feel like there's a band across my head squeezing my head, or my head feels like it's in a vice. Head pressure, feeling Like my head feels like a balloon sometimes, and it's not my sinuses, and it's not a headache. Sometimes people say to me, oh, it's probably just your sinuses or the weather. It has nothing to do with that. It doesn't even feel anything like that. Another symptom that I had that I still get sometimes is my brain burns. Actually, I had burning throughout my entire body. It felt like the insides of my body were sunburned, like a menthol feeling, and it was all burning. My chest, my legs, my back, my stomach. I had horrible digestive issues, burning in my stomach, pain in my stomach, nausea. I had pulsatile tinnitus, where I could feel my heart beating in my ears. I still have really bad temperature regulation issues, sweating bad. I still have looping thoughts and fear. I cry all the time. I feel like I'm dying some days. I'll have a couple days that the symptoms might be a little better, and then it'll just come back. And they call that windows and waves. So, another thing is, because the medical community isn't aware of all this or doesn't want to believe it, and a lot of the doctors, don't know about this, then it becomes an issue with your family, because your family doesn't understand this. It's hard for them to understand. They think you're crazy. They don't know how to help you. But that's another issue, that while you're suffering and going through all this, a lot of times you don't have the support that you need. And literally the groups that I found on Facebook or on the internet of people going through this were really the people that got me through this. Really, nobody will ever really understand this except the people that actually felt this or went through this. But it would be great, if people could read about this and learn about this, especially so they could help their family members get through this. This is the hardest thing. This is the most horrific thing that's ever happened to me. And I still have nightmares and trauma from this. I skipped around my story. I kind of rambled on and on, but also when I was released from the detox center, I actually ended up in another state, staying at my sister's house. My sister had to come and get me. I thought I was going to die from the withdrawals. And I ended up in the University of North Carolina psychiatric and neurological hospital, where I had to be reinstated on the medication. They did recognize that I was going through benzo withdrawal syndrome, and they reinstated me on Valium, which is a longer acting benzodiazepine. And I actually tapered that with a pill cutter and a scale for 8 months, where I had to chip off little pieces of the medication in order to get off it. And it was horrific. I was also put on an antidepressant, which I'm trying to get off of. So, they try to take you off one drug, and then they put you on another psychiatric drug. And then you're stuck with trying to get off the other drugs that they put you on. But yeah, I was out of work for 14 months, sick, bedridden. I couldn't leave my bedroom a lot of the time. I was agoraphobic. I couldn't eat. I couldn't perform tasks around the house as simple as doing laundry or emptying the dishwasher. It was almost like well, not almost, but basically this is like a traumatic brain injury, and it almost like I had to relearn how to do things. As unbelievable as that sounds. There were days where I could barely remember my name. I can remember sitting there and trying to think of my workplace and go around the room at work trying to say out loud everybody's name at work so I could remember. I felt like I was forgetting my life, like I had dementia. I could barely remember my address, my social security number. My head hurt. I couldn't drive for several months. I could barely leave the house. I was literally afraid to leave my bedroom, and that, as ridiculous as that sounds, it was the injury from the chemicals that I was taking. Basically, it's like a toxicity, you know, of being poisoned. And like I said, this doesn't happen to everybody. It also has to do with some people can't metabolize these medications and drugs. And, you know, they actually should do testing, your doctor, so they know which drugs you can safely take and what drugs you can't take. But they don't test for that. So they have no idea, you know, it's like a crapshoot when you take this stuff. But I just hope that, even though I've rambled on and on, I hope the information that I put out there will be helpful for other people to understand, in hopes of getting off this medication, and also it'll help people to be informed before your doctor tries to prescribe this stuff. I'm sorry, I can't even talk. Thank you.